You'll ruin my Persian rug. I have no place for a worthless woman. That was what my son-in-law said as he stood in the doorway, one hand braced against the frame, blocking my way inside. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply stood there for a moment, my travel bag still looped over my shoulder, the smell of smoke somehow still clinging to my clothes even though the fire had burned out days ago. I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I never imagined my story would stretch this far. Just a week earlier, my farm had been reduced to ash. The wildfire moved fast, faster than anyone expected. One moment, the sky was an odd shade of orange. The next, the wind shifted, and everything I had built over 40 years was gone. The barn, the fences. The small white farmhouse where I raised my daughter, measured her height on the kitchen doorframe, and watched her drive away for college. When the evacuation order came, I grabbed what I could fit into a single bag. A change of clothes, my medication, a photo album that smelled faintly of dust and age. I didn't cry then. There wasn't time. By the next morning, there was nothing left to return to. Insurance forms, temporary shelters, folding chairs lined up in a high school gym, volunteers handing out bottled water measured in fluid ounces and boxed meals stamped with expiration dates. Everyone was kind, but kindness has a way of feeling distant when you're 71 and suddenly homeless. I told myself I wouldn't impose for long, just a few nights. A couch? A corner. I still had my pride. So I drove the 2 hours to my daughter's house. It was a beautiful place. 2 stories, freshly painted siding, a lawn trimmed so evenly it looked artificial. I remember thinking as I parked at the curb how quiet the neighborhood was. No sirens, no smoke, no wind carrying sparks. When my daughter opened the door, her smile faltered, just slightly. Enough for me to notice. Before she could say anything, her husband stepped forward. That's when he said it. About the rug. About me. I watched my daughter's eyes drop to the floor. She didn't tell him to stop. She didn't tell him I was her mother. She said nothing at all. I nodded once. Adjusted the strap of my bag. Stepped back onto the porch. The door closed softly behind me. I didn't stand there long enough to hear the lock click. Long enough to understand that this wasn't a moment of panic or stress. This was a decision they'd already made. I sat in my car for several minutes without starting the engine. My hands were steady on the steering wheel. I noticed the fuel gauge was just under half a tank. Enough to get somewhere. I just didn't know where yet. That's when I scrolled through my phone. Past my daughter's number. Past old contacts I hadn't called in years. Until I reached a name I hadn't touched in over a decade. The son of my late neighbor. A boy who used to eat dinner at my table when his mother worked late. A boy I taught how to drive on the dirt road behind my farm. A boy I treated like my own, long before life took him far away. I stared at the number for a long time. No one knew I still had it. Then I pressed call. The call rang twice before it connected. Hello? His voice was deeper than I remembered. Calm. Alert. I told him who I was. There was a pause, long enough for me to wonder if the line had gone dead. Then he said my name softly, as if testing whether it was really me. I didn't know if you'd still have this number, I said. I never changed it, he replied. I hoped someday you'd call. I didn't tell him everything. I didn't need to. I said my farm was gone. I said I had nowhere to stay tonight. I said I was sitting in my car with half a tank of gas. Another pause. Then, where are you? I gave him the name of the town. He told me to stay where I was and asked if I was safe. I said yes. He said he'd call me back. The line went quiet. I sat there for a while after that. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the neat lawns. Somewhere nearby, a sprinkler clicked on, spraying water in perfect arcs. I watched it and thought about how carefully some people protect what they value. When my phone buzzed again, it wasn't him. It was an alert from the county. Another update about the fire. Containment percentages. Acreage lost. Numbers that tried to make sense of things that couldn't be measured. I drove to a small gas station on the edge of town, filled the tank, bought a cup of coffee I didn't really want. The clerk asked if I was headed somewhere far. I told him I wasn't sure yet. I checked my phone again. Still nothing. For a moment, doubt crept in. Maybe I had done the wrong thing. Maybe I should have gone back and knocked again. Maybe I should have accepted the shelter with the folding chairs and fluorescent lights. But then I remembered the sound of the lock clicking. I sat in my car and waited. It was nearly dark when my phone rang. This time, it was him. "I'm on my way," he said. "It'll take a little while." I didn't ask how. I didn't ask from where. I said thank you. He told me to get something warm to eat and stay put. His voice was steady, like someone used to making decisions and following through. I pulled into a diner just off the highway. Vinyl booths, a bell on the door, the smell of grease and coffee. I ordered soup and sat by the window, watching cars pass. As I ate, memories came back to me in pieces. His mother laughing in my kitchen, him doing homework at my table, the way he used to call me ma'am, until I told him he didn't have to. I hadn't thought of those years as anything special at the time. Just life, unfolding quietly. Kindness offered without expectation. After I paid the bill, I went back to my car and turned off the engine. The air had cooled. I wrapped my cardigan tighter around myself and waited. I don't know how long it was before I heard it. A low, distant thrum that didn't belong to the road. At first, I thought it was thunder. Then the sound grew louder. People started to look up. Someone stepped out of the diner and shaded their eyes. The noise filled the air, steady and unmistakable. I watched as a helicopter descended, its lights cutting through the dark, lowering itself toward the open field across the street. The wind kicked up dust and loose gravel. Napkins skittered across the pavement. Cars slowed. Phones came out. I stayed where I was. When the helicopter touched down and the blades slowed, the door opened. He stepped out, taller than I remembered, wearing a jacket that caught the light. He saw me immediately. And in that moment, I knew I hadn't made the wrong call after all. He walked toward me without hesitation. The noise around us faded into the background. The small crowd, the flashing phone screens, the whispering that followed him like a ripple across water. None of it mattered. He stopped a few feet away and looked at me, really looked at me, the way people do when they're checking to see if someone is hurt. "You shouldn't be sitting out here," he said. "It's cold." "I'm fine," I replied. And I was. I felt steady, grounded in a way I hadn't since the fire. He nodded once, then glanced toward the helicopter. A man in a headset was already walking away, giving us space. Everything about the moment felt controlled, intentional. This was not a coincidence or a dramatic flourish. It was simply how his life worked now. He picked up my bag before I could stop him. The same bag I'd carried from my farm, from the shelter, from my daughter's porch. "Let's go," he said. I followed him across the street, the gravel crunching under my shoes. The wind from the blades had died down, leaving the air strangely still. As we approached the helicopter, he slowed his pace to match mine without saying a word. Inside, the seats were wide and clean. The door closed. The noise rose again, then lifted us smoothly off the ground. I watched the diner shrink beneath us, the gas station, the highway. The neat rows of houses that had closed their doors to me hours earlier. He sat across from me, hands folded, waiting. "I didn't know if you'd remember me," I said finally. He smiled, just slightly. "I remember everything," he said. "You're the reason I finished high school. You're the reason I didn't quit when things got bad." I looked out the window. The land below was dark now, broken only by lines of headlights and distant streetlights. Somewhere beyond that darkness was what remained of my farm. "I didn't do anything special," I said. He shook his head. "You gave me a place to exist when I didn't have one." We flew in silence after that. Not an awkward silence, a settled one. When we landed again, it wasn't at his house. Not yet. It was at a private landing area just outside the neighborhood I'd left earlier that evening. I recognized the layout immediately. The curved streets, the trimmed hedges. My daughter's block was just beyond the trees. He stepped out first and offered me his hand. I took it. We stood there for a moment, the helicopter quiet behind us. "They told you to leave," he said, not as a question. "Yes." "And they locked the door." "Yes." He nodded once. That was all. No anger, no lecture, just acknowledgement. "I need to get a few things," he said. "Then we'll go somewhere comfortable." Before I could respond, headlights appeared at the end of the street. A familiar car slowed, then stopped abruptly. My daughter's husband got out first. He stared at the helicopter, at the landing lights, at the man standing beside me. My daughter followed him, her face pale, her mouth slightly open. Neither of them spoke. The man beside me took one step forward and looked at them calmly. "I believe," he said, his voice even and clear, "you owe her an apology." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. And for the first time that day, I saw fear replace certainty in their eyes. They stood there, frozen. My son-in-law's confidence drained first. His shoulders stiffened, then sagged slightly, as if the weight of the moment had finally reached him. My daughter stayed close to his side, her hands clasped together, eyes darting between me and the man beside me. No one spoke. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. I realized then how rarely silence had worked in my favor before. In our family, silence usually meant I was expected to smooth things over, to excuse behavior, to pretend nothing had happened. This time, I did nothing. My son-in-law cleared his throat. "We didn't expect," he began, then stopped. His eyes flicked again to the helicopter, as if it might vanish if he looked away too long. The man beside me didn't move. He didn't repeat himself. He simply waited. My daughter finally spoke. "Mom, we were just overwhelmed today." Her voice was thin, rehearsed. "Everything's been stressful." I looked at her then. Really looked. At the familiar curve of her face, the small scar near her eyebrow from when she fell off her bike at 9. I remembered holding ice to that cut, telling her she'd be fine. "I was overwhelmed too," I said. My voice didn't shake. "I lost my home." She nodded quickly, as if agreement alone might fix something. "We know. It's just..." She gestured vaguely toward the house behind them. "We weren't prepared. Prepared for a mother with one bag." My son-in-law shifted his weight. "We have standards," he said, attempting firmness. "The house?" "That's enough," the man beside me said quietly. 2 words. Calm. Final. Something changed then. Not dramatically. No raised voices, just a subtle shift, like a door closing somewhere inside me. I realized I didn't need them to understand. I didn't need an apology that came too late, or a welcome offered only because circumstances had changed. I had already learned what I needed to know. The man turned slightly toward me. "Are you ready?" I nodded. My daughter took a step forward. "Wait," she said. "Mom, we didn't mean it the way it sounded." I thought about the way it sounded. Clear, precise, deliberate. "I know exactly how it sounded," I replied. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She looked small suddenly, unsure of her footing. I felt no satisfaction in that, only distance. We walked back toward the helicopter together. I didn't look over my shoulder this time. I didn't need to. As we lifted off, the neighborhood fell away beneath us again. The roofs, the driveways, the carefully kept lawns shrinking into patterns. Somewhere down there was the front porch I'd stood on earlier that day, waiting for permission to enter a life I had once built. The flight was short, quiet. The man across from me checked his phone once, then set it aside. "Where are we going?" I asked. "Somewhere you can rest." He said, "There's no rush tonight." When we landed again, it was at a place I didn't recognize. A long driveway, soft lighting, trees lining the path. The air smelled clean, untouched by smoke. Inside, everything was simple and warm. A guest room already prepared, fresh towels, a glass of water waiting on the nightstand. "You're safe here," he said. I sat on the edge of the bed and set my bag down at my feet. For the first time since the fire, I felt the tension leave my shoulders. "Thank you," I said. He nodded. "Get some sleep. We'll talk tomorrow." After he left, I lay back and stared at the ceiling. I thought about my farm, about my daughter, about the long years in between. I didn't feel angry. I felt finished, and for the first time in days, that felt like relief. I woke before sunrise. The room was quiet in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. No hum of traffic, no distant sirens, just stillness. For a few seconds, I didn't remember where I was. Then everything came back at once. The fire, the porch, the locked door, the helicopter. I sat up slowly and reached for my glasses. My hands didn't shake. On the dresser was my bag, exactly where I'd left it. Nothing more, nothing less. 40 years of living reduced to what I could carry without strain. I opened it and checked my medication, counting the pills out of habit. All there. In the bathroom mirror, I studied my face. The lines were deeper than they used to be. Smoke and stress will do that. But my eyes were clear, awake. I looked like someone who had crossed something and wasn't going back. Downstairs, the house was already stirring. I followed the sound of quiet movement into the kitchen. He was there, standing at the counter, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. "Good morning," he said, as if this were the most ordinary thing in the world. Good morning, I replied. He slid a mug toward me. Black, the way I like it. He didn't ask. He remembered. We sat at the table, sunlight beginning to spill across the floor. For a while, neither of us spoke. I didn't feel the need to fill the space. I made a few calls last night, he said finally. I nodded. I had expected that. The fire department confirmed the loss, he continued. Total. There's nothing salvageable. I know. The insurance company will take time, he said. Weeks, maybe months. I've waited longer for less. He looked at me then, carefully. You don't have to rush anything. I took a sip of coffee. I'm not rushing, I said. I'm deciding. That seemed to satisfy him. After breakfast, I stepped outside. The air was cool, clean, no smell of ash. The driveway stretched long and quiet, and bordered by trees that hadn't burned, leaves still green. I stood there for a moment, letting the contrast settle in. I thought about my farm as it used to be, the creak of the porch boards, the sound of wind through the fields, the way evenings smelled after rain. I let myself remember it fully, without rushing past the pain go. Inside, my phone buzzed. A message from my daughter. Mom, please call me. We need to talk. I stared at the screen until it went dark again. We need to talk. Those words had always meant I was expected to listen, to forgive, to make room. I set the phone down without replying. Later that morning, he returned from a short trip into town. He handed me a folder and set it gently on the table. Just information, he said. Options. Nothing urgent. I opened it. Inside were printed listings, temporary housing, longer-term possibilities. Everything organized. Everything thought through. You don't have to decide today, he said again. I know, I replied, and I meant it. That afternoon, I sat by the window and watched the light change. I thought about my daughter as a child, about the promises I'd made to myself when she was born, about how love doesn't always protect you from being discarded. I didn't feel bitter. I felt clear. That evening, my phone buzzed again. Another message. Longer this time. Apologies, explanations, words stacked carefully, like they might build a bridge back to where things were. I didn't answer. I wasn't angry. I wasn't punishing anyone. I was simply done stepping back into places that had already shown me there was no room for me. When night fell, I went to bed without setting an alarm. Tomorrow would come whether I was ready or not. And for the first time since the fire, that thought didn't frighten me at all. The next morning, the phone calls started. Not from my daughter at first, from people who had never called me directly before. An unfamiliar number appeared on the screen while I was finishing breakfast. I let it ring once, twice, before answering. Ma'am, a man said carefully, this is your son-in-law's attorney. I waited. There seems to have been a misunderstanding last night, he continued. We're hoping to clear things up quickly and quietly. Quietly. That word again. There was no misunderstanding, I said. A pause followed. Papers shifting. A breath taken. They were under a lot of stress, he tried. Emotions were high. I was calm, I replied. So was he. He didn't argue with that. Another call came an hour later. This one from my daughter. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was long. Her voice shook. She talked about fear, about pressure, about how things had gotten out of hand. She said they never meant for it to happen the way it did. I deleted the message without replying. By noon, a third call came in. Then a fourth. Each one more careful than the last. Offers began to surface. A guest room, a storage space for my belongings, temporary arrangements. Words like family and support were used generously now. I listened to none of it. I spent the afternoon sitting on the back porch of the house where I was staying. The chair was comfortable, the air warm. A bird landed on the railing nearby and stayed there for a moment, unafraid. I thought about how quickly circumstances change when power shifts, how compassion suddenly appears when consequences arrive. He joined me later, carrying 2 glasses of iced tea. He set one beside me and took the chair across from mine. They're trying to fix it, he said. I know. They want to talk. I'm sure they do. He studied my face as if making sure I meant what I wasn't saying. What do you want? I didn't answer right away. I watched the bird fly off. I listened to the leaves move in the breeze. I want to be left alone, I said finally. For once, he nodded. That can be arranged. Later that day, he handed me another folder. Inside were documents this time. Official ones. Temporary identification replacements. Housing options closer to medical facilities. Everything practical. Everything steady. You'll need a mailing address, he said. At least for now. I nodded. This one is fine. As evening approached, my phone buzzed again. A text from my daughter this time. Shorter. More urgent. Mom, please. He's terrified. We didn't know who he was. We didn't know what would happen. I stared at the words. They didn't know who he was. That had been the problem, hadn't it? Not that they'd turned me away. Not that they'd locked the door, but that they'd believed they could do so without consequence. I typed a reply, then erased it. Typed again. Erased it again. In the end, I sent nothing. That night, I slept deeply. No dreams. No sudden waking. When I opened my eyes, the room was dark and peaceful. I realized then that nothing they offered now could undo what had already been said. Or done. Some doors don't need to be closed twice. By morning, I felt lighter. Not because things were resolved, but because I'd stopped carrying what was never meant to be mine to fix. Whatever came next would come on my terms. And for the first time in a long while, that was enough. The following afternoon, I asked to see the land. Not the house. Not the driveway. The land beyond it. He didn't ask why. He just nodded and drove us out past the gates, down a quiet road that curved through trees and open fields. The farther we went, the more the air began to feel familiar. Earthy. Honest. We stopped near a wide stretch of ground bordered by old oaks. The grass was uneven, untouched by design. No fences, no signs, just space. This belonged to my mother, he said as we stepped out of the car. She never sold it. I walked slowly, my shoes brushing against the grass. I bent down and picked up a handful of soil, rubbing it between my fingers. It was darker than what I remembered from my farm, but it smelled the same. It's good land, I said. He smiled. I thought you'd say that. We stood there for a long moment. The sun was warm on my shoulders. I closed my eyes and listened. Wind through leaves, a distant bird call. No engines. No voices. I don't want charity, I said quietly. He didn't hesitate. I know. I don't want to move into something shiny that doesn't belong to me. I know. I looked at him then. I want something small, something I can tend to, something that's mine. He nodded again. Then that's what we'll do. We drove back without saying much else. That evening, I sat at the table with a notebook and a pen. I hadn't written anything in months. I started listing things. What I needed, what I didn't, what I could let go of. I didn't need a big house. I didn't need new furniture. I didn't need apologies. I needed peace. Quiet. A place where I wasn't tolerated but rooted. My phone buzzed once more. A message from my daughter. They're saying you're being manipulated, that you're being turned against us. I read it once. Then again. Manipulated. I thought about the locked door, the words spoken without hesitation, the silence that followed. No one had turned me against anyone. I had simply seen what was already there. I set the phone face down and continued writing. Later, he sat across from me, reviewing plans on a tablet. Permits, contractors, timelines, everything measured in weeks and months, not emergencies. We can start slow, he said. There's no rush. I've waited my whole life, I replied. I can wait a little longer. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about my daughter again. About the little girl who used to fall asleep on my chest during thunderstorms. About the woman who had looked away while her husband shut me out. I didn't feel hatred. I felt distance. Somewhere between grief and clarity, I had crossed into something else. A place where I no longer chased understanding or approval. I slept easily. In the morning, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since before the fire. The loss was still there. The ache hadn't disappeared, but beneath it was something steadier. A future that wasn't borrowed. A door that didn't need to be knocked on. And the quiet certainty that this time I was building something no one could take from me again. The first person from my past to reach out wasn't my daughter. It was a woman I hadn't spoken to in nearly 15 years. Her name appeared on my phone one morning while I was sitting at the kitchen table, sorting through paperwork. I stared at it for a moment before answering. I heard what happened, she said, about the fire, and everything after. Her voice was careful, respectful. She didn't assume anything. We had raised our children together in the same small farming community years ago, long before my daughter married and moved away, long before my life became something I was expected to shrink to fit. I'm sorry, she continued. I should have called sooner. You're calling now, I said. That's enough. We talked for a while. About the fire. about how quickly news travels when people don't expect you to disappear quietly. She told me others were asking about me. Old neighbors, people who remembered my farm, my kitchen table, the way I always sent them home with more food than they arrived with. They couldn't believe you were turned away, she said. Not you. I didn't respond to that. I had learned not to measure my worth by surprise anymore. After the call ended, I sat there thinking about how much of my life had been built quietly, without announcements, without witnesses, and how easily those things are forgotten when you stop being useful. That afternoon, I drove with him back to the land we had visited the day before. I walked it again, slower this time, imagining where the sun would rise, where shade would fall in the late afternoon, where a small porch might sit. I wasn't planning a grand return. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was choosing. As we stood there, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was my daughter. Mom, people are talking. This is getting out of hand. Out of hand. I remembered how small my world had felt on her porch. How contained. How easily dismissed. I typed a reply, then stopped. Deleted it. Instead, I put the phone back in my pocket and kept walking. That evening, he invited me to sit with him while he reviewed more documents, property assessments, temporary structures, timelines measured in months, not emergencies. Everything laid out plainly. You'll have full ownership, he said, as if discussing the weather. Nothing temporary. I nodded. That matters. Later, alone in my room, I opened the photo album I'd carried out of the fire. The pages smelled faintly of smoke. I turned them carefully. There I was, younger, standing in a field with my daughter on my hip. There she was again, older, holding a ribbon at the county fair. There was the farmhouse, white and sturdy, before time and fire had touched it. I didn't cry. I closed the album and set it aside. That night, my daughter called again. I let it ring, then again, then once more. Finally, a text appeared. We didn't think you had options. I read it twice. Options. That was the truth of it, wasn't it? They hadn't turned me away because I was their mother. They had turned me away because they believed I had nowhere else to go. I set the phone down. In the quiet that followed, I felt something settle into place. Not anger. Not sadness. Clarity. The next morning, I woke early and stepped outside. The air was cool. The land ahead of me, still empty, still waiting. For the first time since the fire, I wasn't reacting to loss. I was shaping what came next. And that, I realized, was something no one could take from me again. The meeting was set for the following afternoon. Not at my daughter's house, not at mine. A neutral office downtown, all glass and clean lines, the kind of place where voices stay low and decisions are recorded in writing. He asked if I wanted to come. I said yes. I didn't dress carefully. I chose what was comfortable. Shoes I could walk in. A sweater that felt like mine. I wasn't there to impress anyone. We arrived early. I sat in the waiting area and watched people pass by, carrying folders, phones pressed to their ears, lives moving forward without interruption. I wondered how many of them believed their families would always protect them. When my daughter and her husband arrived, they hesitated at the door. I noticed how she avoided my eyes at first, then forced herself to look up. Her husband's posture was rigid, rehearsed. They sat across from me. No one spoke right away. Finally, he cleared his throat. We want to make this right, he said. There's been a lot of misunderstanding. I looked at him calmly. There hasn't. My daughter flinched. She leaned forward. Please, we were scared. We didn't know who he was. We didn't know what would happen. I nodded once. I know. Her husband added. We're willing to help now. You can stay with us. We can set ground rules, make adjustments. Ground rules. I thought about the word, about how quickly it had appeared once circumstances changed. I won't be staying with you, I said. The room went quiet. My daughter's eyes filled. You're choosing him over us? I didn't answer immediately. I wanted to be precise. I'm choosing myself, I said. Her husband leaned back, frustration breaking through. You're letting this situation get out of control. I met his gaze. You lost control when you locked the door. He looked away. The man beside me hadn't spoken yet. He hadn't needed to. When he did, it was brief. There will be no further contact regarding housing, he said. All arrangements have been made. My daughter looked at him sharply. You're tearing our family apart. No, he replied evenly. That happened before I arrived. I stood then, slowly, carefully. I wasn't rushing. I didn't come here to argue, I said. I came to be clear. I looked at my daughter. I raised you to believe that people matter more than things. Somewhere along the way, that changed. I can't fix that for you. Tears fell then. Quiet ones. She reached for my hand, but I stepped back. I love you, I said, but I won't return to a place where I'm tolerated only when it's convenient. We left without shaking hands. Outside, the air felt lighter. I took a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Are you all right? He asked. Yes, I said, and I meant it. That evening, my phone buzzed one last time. A message from my daughter. I hope one day you'll understand. I read it once, then set the phone down. Understanding wasn't what I needed anymore. Peace was. And for the first time since the fire, I knew exactly where I stood. Construction began quietly. No announcements, no photos, no explanations to anyone who didn't need one. I watched from a folding chair set near the edge of the land as the first stakes were placed. Wooden markers driven into soil that hadn't been touched in decades. The men worked steadily, measuring twice, speaking in low voices. No one hurried them. I liked that. Each morning, I walked the perimeter before they arrived. I learned where the sun hit first, where the shade lingered longest. I began to imagine ordinary things again. A small table by the window, a chair on the porch, a place to hang my coat without asking permission. This wasn't a replacement for what I'd lost. It was something else. One afternoon, while the foundation was being set, my phone buzzed. A message from my daughter's number. I didn't open it right away. I watched the concrete being smoothed instead, the slow, deliberate motion of hands shaping something solid. When I finally looked, it was brief. We heard you're building something nearby. No apology, no warmth, just awareness. I didn't reply. That evening, I sat with him on the back steps of the house I was staying in. The sky turned pink, then gray. We didn't talk much. There was no need. They're watching, he said quietly. I know. Does that bother you? I thought about it for a moment. No, I said. It clarifies things. He nodded. As the days passed, the structure took shape. Walls rose. Windows were installed. A roof settled into place. It was modest, clean, practical, nothing extravagant, nothing that needed defending. One morning, a truck pulled up unexpectedly. I recognized it immediately. My daughter stepped out first. Her husband followed. They didn't approach right away. They stood near the edge of the property, looking around. I stayed where I was, seated, hands folded in my lap. Eventually, my daughter walked closer. Mom, she said. I waited. We didn't realize you were serious, she continued, about not coming back. I was, I replied. Her husband glanced at the house taking shape. This seems permanent. It is, he frowned. You didn't have to do all this. I met his eyes. I did. They stood there, unsure. No script prepared them for this version of me. The one who wasn't pleading, the one who wasn't waiting to be invited back into something smaller. My daughter swallowed. We thought you'd calm down. I didn't respond to that. After a moment, they left the way they'd come. No argument, no scene, just retreat. That night, I slept soundly. Weeks later, the house was finished. Simple. Strong. The door opened easily. The lock turned smoothly. Inside, everything smelled new. Clean wood, fresh paint. I stepped inside alone. I walked through each room slowly, ran my hand along the counter, opened the windows, let the air move freely. This place didn't carry memories yet. That was the point. As I stood in the doorway, I realized something important. This wasn't about proving anything to my daughter or her husband. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about choosing where I stood when everything else fell away. And now, I knew. I closed the door behind me, not to shut anyone out, but to mark something finished. Something ended. Something mine, finally beginning. The invitation arrived by mail. Not a call, not a text. An envelope with my name printed neatly on the front, delivered to my new address. No return address. I recognized the handwriting anyway. Inside was a single card. Family dinner. Sunday at 6. We would like to talk. No apology, no explanation. Just an expectation. I set the card on the counter and continued unpacking my kitchen boxes. Plates first, then cups. The ordinary work of settling in. By the time everything had a place, the card was still where I'd left it. That Sunday, I stayed home. I watered the small garden plot I'd started behind the house. The soil was still dark and loose, ready. I planted herbs I knew how to care for. Things that came back year after year if you treated them right. That evening, my phone rang. My daughter. I watched it ring until it stopped. A voicemail followed. Her voice was tight, controlled. She said they were waiting. She said this silence was hurting everyone. She said family doesn't turn its back like this. I didn't delete the message. I didn't respond. The next day, her husband called, then his attorney, then a message from someone I didn't recognize, saying they were concerned. Concern had arrived late. I spent the afternoon organizing paperwork instead. Insurance updates, property documents, a new driver's license with my new address printed clearly beneath my name. I held it for a moment before placing it in my wallet. This is where I live now, I thought. A few days later, my daughter came in person. She didn't knock loudly, just once. Soft. I opened the door and stepped outside, closing it behind me. She looked around, taking in the house, the porch, the land stretching behind it. I didn't think you'd really do it, she said. Did. I did. Her eyes filled. We didn't mean to lose you. I considered that, carefully. You didn't think you would, I said. That's different. She opened her mouth, then closed it. The words she'd practiced didn't seem to fit anymore. I can't keep explaining myself, I continued, and I won't keep proving I deserve a place. She nodded slowly. So this is it. This is where I am, I replied. She stood there for a long moment, then she reached out as if to touch my arm. I stepped back, not out of anger, out of certainty. I love you, she said. I know, I replied, but love doesn't excuse everything. She left without arguing. That night, I sat on my porch and watched the sky darken. The house behind me was quiet, solid, mine. I thought about all the years I'd spent smoothing things over, making space, accepting less so others could feel comfortable. That chapter was finished. I didn't feel victorious. I felt complete. Some people think strength looks like confrontation, like raised voices and final words. They're wrong. Sometimes strength is simply knowing when not to return, and when to stay exactly where you are. The first night I slept in the house alone, I left the windows open. The air moved freely through the rooms, carrying the soft sounds of insects and wind through the trees. No locks clicking behind me, no footsteps pacing on the other side of a door, just quiet. I lay in bed and listened. I thought about the farm I'd lost, the porch boards worn smooth by decades of use, the fields I'd walked at dawn, coffee in hand, planning nothing more than the day ahead. I let myself grieve it properly this time, not in a rush, not while standing in someone else's doorway. Grief, I learned, needs space. In the morning, sunlight spilled across the floor of my kitchen. I brewed coffee and stood at the counter, watching steam rise. A simple moment, one I used to take for granted. I unpacked the last box that day. Inside were a few things I'd carried through every move of my adult life. A handwritten recipe card, a ribbon from my daughter's first school play, a small stone I'd picked up from the edge of my old field years ago, smooth from handling. I placed the stone on the windowsill. Outside, the land stretched quietly, unchanged by drama or memory. It didn't ask me who I belonged to. It didn't question my worth. It simply waited. Weeks passed, then months. My life settled into a new rhythm. Morning walks, tending the small garden, reading in the afternoons. People from my past reached out occasionally, some to check in, some out of curiosity. I chose which calls to return. I never heard from my son-in-law again. My daughter sent a card once. No return address, just a few careful sentences wishing me well. I placed it in a drawer and closed it. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger burns hot and fast. What remained was cooler, clearer. One afternoon, I drove past my old road. I didn't stop. There was nothing there for me now. I wished the land well, and kept going. Back home, I sat on my porch as evening fell. The sky darkened slowly, the way it should. I thought about how many years I'd spent believing endurance was the same thing as strength. It isn't. Strength is knowing when to leave the porch where you're no longer welcome. Strength is not knocking twice on a locked door. Strength is building something new without asking permission. I had done that. Not loudly. Not to prove a point, but quietly, with intention. If you're listening to my story and you've ever been made to feel small in a place you helped build, know this. You are not wrong for wanting more. You are not weak for walking away, and it is never too late to choose yourself. I closed the door that night, not in anger, but in peace. The house held steady behind me, and for the first time in my life, I knew exactly where I belonged.